Tisha B'av is the saddest day of the Jewish calendar. And yet a mere 6 days after Tisha B'av, we celebrate one of the most joyous days of the Jewish calendar. And that is the 15th day of Av, Tu B'av. There are a variety of opinions given in the Gemara exactly as to why Tu B'av is such a joyous holiday. L'haya yamim tovim b'Yisrael ki yom kippur mechamisha asar b'Av. The greatest days of the Jewish calendar are Yom Kippur and Tu B'av. So the Gemara says it's understandable why Yom Kippur is such a glorious day, because we cleanse ourselves of all our averas. But what is so special, what is so joyous about Tu B'av, the 15th day of Av? There are a number of opinions in the Gemara, and Rav Masna over there in Bava Basra and Masechta Tainis says as follows: Yom Shenitnu Harugei Betar Likfura. It's the day that the people that were massacred in the city of Betar after the destruction of the second base Hamikdash were finally able to be buried. On that very day, that the people that were massacred in Betar were able to be buried, Tiknu b'Yavna Hatoiv HaMeitiv. In Yavna, they coined a new bracha called Hatoiv HaMeitiv. Hatoiv shlo hisrichu, that God is good in the fact that the bodies did not decompose. V'hameitiv shenitnu likvura. You have to understand a little of Jewish history. The city of Betar was the last Jewish stronghold to remain after the Churban Bayis Sheni, after the destruction of the second base Hamikdash. But it was massacred by the Roman army sometime after the Churban. Thousands, and according to one opinion I read, there was over 1 million people were massacred. But the bodies were left to rot. The Jews finally made it back into the city of Betar, and they saw that the bodies did not decompose. And they were able to bury their dead and give them Kever Yisrael. At this occasion, the Chazal coined a new bracha called Hatoiv HaMeitiv. As the Gemara explains, Hatoiv shlo yisrichu, that the bodies did not rot, did not decompose, and HaMeitiv shenitnu l'kvura. The bracha of Hatoiv HaMeitiv is said on joyous occasions. When a person has a baby boy, he makes Hatoiv HaMeitiv. Under the right conditions, if a person gets a second bottle of wine at a Suda, he makes Hatoiv HaMeitiv. If you buy a new car and you plan to give other people's rides, you make Hatoiv HaMeitiv. It's a bracha that one makes on joyous occasions. Therefore, it always struck me, this Gemara has struck me as an astonishing Gemara. Imagine coming into a scene of seeing thousands upon thousands of hundreds of thousands of bodies, dead bodies, and the reaction is, thank God? Hatoiv HaMeitiv, God who's so good and is so giving. This is the reaction that you see when you see hundreds of thousands of Jewish dead. And this should be counted as one of the most joyous days of the year. I once heard the following explanation for this Gemara. They were indeed grateful and they were happy, because at that moment they realized something that they thought was not true. And they realized that God had not abandoned them and that they were not alone. And that is indeed a great simcha. Because you must try to imagine how the Jewish people felt after Churban Bayis Sheni. We had lost the Beis Hamikdash. Thousands had been killed. We were exiled to the four corners of the earth. The Jewish people at that time had felt as God had abandoned them, that they were in effect, had been divorced by the Ribono Shel Olam. And like a husband will send out an unfaithful wife, this is how they felt. They were depressed, they felt abandoned, and they felt totally forlorn. But when they saw Betar, and they saw the miracle, the Nes Nigla, the open miracle that the Ribono Shel Olam had performed for them, that the bodies did not decompose, and they were able to bury, they said, the Ribono Shel Olam has not abandoned us. and we had not been divorced, and he still cared about us, and that they were not alone. And here the Ribono Shel Olam was demonstrating once again one of the signature middos and characteristics of the Ribono Shel Olam. And that is that the Ribono Shel Olam is a nosei ba'olam chaverei. That God, Kaviyachol, shares the burden and the pain of his people. And he lets us know that I am with you in your time of need, and that I feel your pain, and that you are not alone. I say over here the word that God showed us again this concept and this middah and this characteristic and this trait of nosei ba'olam, of being with his people. Because this middah, this concept, this trait of the Ribono Shel Olam, of showing his people how much he cares, was almost, one can say, the Ribono Shel Olam's Shalom Aleichem to Klal Yisroel. This is how he first introduced himself to us. We all know the story of Moshe Rabbeinu at the burning bush. And the pasuk says, "Vayera Malach HaShem Elov Balabas Eish Mitoich HaSneh," that God appeared to Moshe Rabbeinu in a burning bush, a lowly bush. Says Rashi, "Mitoich HaSneh v'lo ilon acher," no other tree. Mishum imay anochi b'tzara, that the Ribono Shel Olam was sending a message to Klal Yisroel. I am with you in your pain. From a lowly bush, in order to telegraph this message, that I am Kaviyachol down there with you in the depths of your despair. That even though you're enslaved in Egypt, but imay anochi b'tzara, I am with you. I share your burden. I am nosei ba'olam. And an even more dramatic example of this occurred at Matan Torah. Something happened at Kabbalas HaTorah when the Ribono Shel Olam gave Torah to Klal Yisroel and Har Sinai that is almost impossible to imagine. The Ribono Shel Olam let us have a glimpse of his Kisei HaKavod, of the heavenly throne. Vayiru es Elokei Yisrael. And they saw Kaviyachol, they saw the Ribono Shel Olam. The Sachas Kadraglov, and under the feet, Kaviyachol, the throne of the Ribono Shel Olam, says the pasuk, is Kamase Livnas Hasapir. Translated into English, they saw HaShem, and under his feet was the likeness of sapphire brickwork. Brickwork? Why brickwork of all things? Says Rashi, he hoisa lefonav b'shas hashibord liskar tzarashin shal Yisrael, that the Ribono Shel Olam himself kept a brickwork under his feet to remind him of what Klal Yisroel is going through. The pain that they had to endure, the bricks that they had to make, for which they were punished if they didn't come up with enough bricks. The bricks, the bricks, the bricks. They're suffering from bricks. I'm going to keep bricks under my feet. Kaviyachol. Because I'm with you. Because I'm there with you. This is what Ribono Shel Olam demonstrates to Klal Yisroel. He did it at the Sneh. He did it at Betar. And perhaps what was the most intimate encounter between the Ribono Shel Olam and Klal Yisroel, between Ribono Shel Olam and human beings, the most intimate encounter in the history of humanity, was Kabbalas HaTorah. And what middos does the Ribono Shel Olam choose to show Klal Yisroel at that most intimate of moments? Not Rachum, not Chanun, not Erech HaPayim, not all of the middos for which we define the Ribono Shel Olam, but one middah, nosei ba'olam, to commiserate, to empathize, to share the burden. We're all aware of a mitzvah saseh derives called v'halachta b'drachav, to walk in the ways of the Rebbeinu Shalom, to emulate his ways, to be like him. Imitati odei. And we're all familiar with the Gemara that says, how did we accomplish that? How are we like the Rebbeinu Shalom? How do we walk in his ways? Says the Gemara, Elohalach b'midaisev shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Act like he acts. Mahu malbish haruim, just like the Rebbeinu Shalom clothes those that need clothes. Af atah halbei sharumim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu bikar chaylim, the Rebbeinu Shalom visited the sick. Af atah bikar chaylim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu nichem avelim, the Rebbeinu Shalom comforted the bereaved. Af atah nachem avelim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu kavar mesim, the Rebbeinu Shalom buried the dead. Af atah kvar mesim. But we must add something else to that list. And that is the Kadosh Baruch Hu shares the burden, and he feels the pain, and he's there with us, and he doesn't leave us alone. He feels for us. Afatah. We also have to be nice be'ol and feel the pain. And that's harder to do than the other things, because the other things are acts. You can always visit the sick. You can always come to a Shiva house. But here, Rebbeinu Shalom is asking more for us. He's asking us to feel. And to mandate feelings is a much more difficult task. So how do we do that? How do you feel? How do you feel someone's pain? I think part of the answer is that the Rebbeinu Shalom gave us all a gift. And that gift is something that we have to use to fill this obligation of feeling someone's pain. And that's the gift of imagination. We all imagine from time to time. Recently there was a Powerball lottery. Did you imagine what it would be like to win $600 million? I did. I even thought how I was going to spend the money. I would buy a deer in Eretz Yisrael. I wouldn't want much. A Learjet. But other than that, I'm basically happy. I didn't buy a ticket. But I imagined. And we all imagine. Have you ever imagined expanding your kitchen and what it would be like to have those granite countertops and space galore so that you could feed your ever-growing family and you can make Pesach with ease and then go away for Pesach? We all imagine. We all dream. It's a kayak. It's a gift. So Rebbeinu Shalom gave us this gift, not to imagine Powerball winnings and new kitchens and vacations and the like. The Rebbeinu Shalom gave us the ability to imagine in order for us to imagine what it is to be in someone else's position. Im kesef talve es ami, the pasuk says, there's a mitzvah to lend people money. Es he'oni imach. Rashi comments on this pasuk, es he'oni imach. Heve mistakel ba'atzmacha ki'ilu ata ani. It is not sufficient to just lend the person money, but you must put yourself in that person's place and imagine what it must be like. What it must be like if somebody comes to you and says, I can't make the mortgage payment, I'm facing foreclosure, please lend me the money. What it must be like when a school calls up a family and says, if you don't pay the tuition, your children will not be able to come to school. What it must be like to be in that position. And when that person comes to you, it is not merely sufficient to write the person a check. You have to imagine how you would feel and how you would like to be talked to and how you would like to be dealt with. And only then can we really fulfill the mitzvah of nosei, of lending a person money. I could tell you story after story of how Anoshim Gedolim, Gedolei Yisroel, demonstrated this middah in actuality. Rabbi Zalman Meltzer, Zechet Tzadik Livrocha, the Zekan Rosh Yeshivas, the father-in-law of Rabbi Aaron Kotler, Zechet Tzadik Livrocha, his son-in-law, Rabbi Aaron, and his grandson-in-law, Reb Schneier, made it out of the horrors of Europe. Reb Schneier went to Eretz Yisrael to learn by his Zayda. And then it was time for him to get married. So Reb Schneier left Eretz Yisrael and he went back to America to get married. Rabbi Zalman escorted him down from his apartment down the stairs, and in the middle of the stairs he stopped and he did not escort him all the way to the car that was waiting outside to take Reb Schneier to travel to America. He kissed him goodbye there on the steps, wished him mazel tov, but didn't go down to the street. When the Talmidim asked Reb Schneier, why didn't you go down all the way? He says, because you know many people there are, our neighbors, that aren't zeichet to see an enokel get married. How many neighbors we have that they're 8 o'clock, that their grandchildren didn't make it out of the horrors of the Holocaust, that they're never going to get married and they're never going to see children from them? Yes, I'm happy and I'm misameach, but I'm going to keep it private. Because so many others are not fortunate as we are. He kept the simcha to himself. That's putting yourself in someone else's position. In 1970, sure many of you who were around in those days remember this. Rav Hutner Zechet Tzadik Livrocha was taken as a hostage together on a plane. Palestinian terrorists captured planes, hijacked planes. They're sitting on a runway in Amman, Jordan. They're being held for Arab terrorists held in Israeli prisons. The whole world came in prayer and tefillah for the benefit of those hostages, including the great Rav Hutner. Rav Hutner was one of the first people to be released. And when he came back to the United States, the entire Torah world made a kabbalas panim to greet Rav Hutner at Kennedy Airport in a hangar. There were thousands of people there to greet the great Gadol, to be misameach that he was released from a life-threatening situation. There was a band that was playing music. Ramesha Feinstein, Zechet Tzadik Livrocha, walked into the hall, into the hangar, and he heard the music playing. He said, the music has to stop. Because yes, it's a simcha, and yes, we have to show kavod HaTorah and our simcha, but there are people in Flatbush who still have people on that plane. And when there are people on that plane, you don't play music. Because you don't celebrate fully when other people are in pain. That's nosei b'ol, that's empathizing, that's being there with someone, that's being sensitive to somebody else's plight. Rabbi Yaakov Bender, the Rashiva of Yeshiva Darkei Torah in Far Rockaway, once told a story that Thursday nights in his yeshiva, there was a person that came to sell flowers for the bachur to buy flowers to take home to their mothers for Shabbos. There was a boy, and this is not a Gadol B'Yisrael, this is a high school yeshiva bachur. There was a boy that used to buy flowers every week for his mother. So he comes up to the vendor. He's about to buy the flowers, and all of a sudden he turns around and walks away. And 5 minutes later, he comes back again, and he's about to buy the flowers, and he turns around and walks away. And finally, he comes back a third time, and he buys the flowers. The vendor asked him, what happened the first 2 times? You came, you turned around. He says, because every time, the first 2 times when I came, there's another boy in the yeshiva who just lost his mother recently. And he has no mother to buy flowers for. So I didn't want to buy flowers in front of him and remind him that he has no mother. That's not Rav Yisroel Zalman, that's not Rav Moshe Feinstein, that's not Rav Avram HaKayin Pam, that's a yeshiva bocher who has a sensitivity to realize that other people are in pain. Put yourself in the other person's shoes. Rabbi Yoel Burstein, the Mnal of the Beis Yaakov of Los Angeles, not long ago told me a story of a couple that for many years did not have children. Finally, they were blessed with twin girls. The twins were about 18 months old. And their mother was feeling the burden, so she said, let's go up to the mountains, spend a Shabbos in the mountains. And they went up and they had a wonderful Shabbos, and she didn't have to cook and she didn't have to clean. She asked her husband, how about if I stay the rest of the week and you go back home, you come up for next Shabbos? The husband said, B'koved gadol. So the woman was there for the week. She comes into the dining room of the hotel. She goes to wash the tilas yadayim. She takes one of the twins with her, and she leaves the other twin at the table. She comes back to the table, and the other twin is gone. The woman panics. Where's my baby? She lifts up one of the twins and she yells out in the dining room, did you see someone that looks just like this? I'm missing my baby. I'm missing my child. Please help me find my baby. The other people made a perfunctory look around. They couldn't find the child. The woman runs to the dining room. She can't find the baby. She runs out to the hall. She can't find the baby. Finally, she sees a group of Beis Yaakov's girls standing, and she says, please help me find my child. And there's one girl that comes forth and says, okay, let's organize this. She tells one of the girls, okay, let's split up. You go to the dining room. You go to the playground. You go to the classroom. You go to the parking lot. And they all split up. And the woman waits there in anticipation for them to come back with the child. And one by one, each of them comes back and they don't have the baby. Until finally, this girl, the organizer, she comes back with the child. They ask her, where did you find her? She says, I found her in the classroom. The other girl says to her, but I checked that classroom. She wasn't there. She says, did you look under every desk? I looked under every desk. She gives the baby to her mother. Her mother doesn't have the words to thank her. She says, listen, let me ask you something. How come you went to such extraordinary efforts? The people in the dining room didn't pay attention. How come you? The girl was hesitant. And finally she told the mother, because I'm Leiby Kletsky's sister. Sometimes it's life that teaches us how to be nosei b'chaverei. So now that we know the primacy of nosei b'chaverei in the hierarchy of midas, and we know that it's about trying to become the other person, what do we actually do? Well, perhaps we should start with what we shouldn't do. Example number one. If you happen to be speaking to someone who unfortunately does not yet have children, don't keep talking about your children. Now you say, of course, that's pashut. But people do this all the time. Not maliciously, God forbid, but inadvertently. And I know a former member of our kollel who for several years did not have children. Now, Baruch HaShem, they have 2 children. But when he was learning in kollel, and they didn't have children after many, many attempts, he comes into Seder in the morning. He sits down at his table, and the chavrusa pair sitting next to him sit down, and they each say to each other, "Boy, did I have a horrible night last night. My kids kept me up to half the night," and the other chavrusa concurred, "Yeah, my kid also kept me up." And all of a sudden, they see this childless fellow staring at them with the "do you want to trade places" stare. They quickly dropped the subject and started learning. They weren't being cruel. They weren't just being sensitive. Example number 2. When you're making a chasana for your daughter and the details are getting to you and you feel overwhelmed, don't call up your neighbor and tell her how difficult it is making the chasana, because she still has a daughter that's looking for a shidduch and she would give almost anything to be in your position. And when you see an older single, don't say, "No." And if you don't think that happens, you're mistaken. A woman wrote me a letter. She's a miyucheses, an older woman, an older lady. Please talk about the insensitivity that people have to people that are single through no fault of their own. And there comes a stage at which you should stop saying, "Emir Hashem by dear." Because it's not a bracha. It's a punch in the gut. And if you're speaking to a woman who unfortunately is an almana, try not to mention how your husband is out doing errands for you. Those are the don'ts. But how do we do? If we were on the madrega of someone like Rav Pam Zatzal, we would literally feel their pain. Rav Pam once went to be Menachem Ovel to a parent who had lost a child, Rachmana Litzlan, the most difficult of Nichum Avelims. Do you know what Rav Pam told them? He came in, he sat down, he cried. He got up, he said, "Amokim inachem eschem," and he walked out. And he didn't say a word. The parents said that his was the most comforting Nichum Avelim, because that is the classic and true Nichum Avelim. As Rashi says in Masechta Shabbos on the Gemara of a Menachmen Avelim b'Shabbos, that we don't do Nicham Avelim on Shabbos, according to Mandamar Zok Rashi, Mishum Mitztayer im HaMitztarim. Because you're causing yourself pain, which you shouldn't do on Shabbos. That's classic Nicham Avelim, to literally feel their pain. And I may add parenthetically, that if you ever, chas v'shalom, have to be menachem ovel to parents who have lost a child, do not try to explain to them why they lost their child. Because you don't know. Unless you're a Navi. Most of us are not on that level, to come in and to cry with people. But there's something that we can do at every Nicham Avelim. And that is to convey that you are not alone. You know, unfortunately, both my wife and I lost older siblings this year. And on both occasions, our neighbors sent in food. Everything from soup to nuts, including an entire Suda HaMafsekes on Erev Yom Kippur before my wife got up from her shiva. We both found it extremely comforting. Why? How does a potato kugel assuage one's loss? Because it says you are not alone. If I can't replace your loss, if I can't find the right words to say, if I can't sit and cry with you, but I want you to know that I am with you, and you are not alone. And just as the Rebbeinu Shalom showed Klal Yisroel on that 15th day of Av, when they saw the Harugei Betar, and it was a simcha because the Rebbeinu Shalom himself told us, you are not alone. So too, in our own small way, small acts like sending food, or sending a note, or just sitting with an ovel or a sick person, or a lonely person. That's a nichum. That's comforting. And there are other things that we can do for people in their times of need. And that is, we can listen to them. Not provide them necessarily with brilliant eitzes and advice. Rav Schwab Zatzal, who was a Rav for many, many years, used to say that people would come to him and pour out their hearts and ask them, tell them their tzaras. And he once commented and he said, I don't have many times much to tell them. I can't solve their problems. I don't always have brilliant solutions. I can't wave a magic wand and make their tzaras go away. But I can listen. And he would listen. And it would be therapeutic. Because people feel they are not alone. And there's one last thing, but certainly not the least. We can daven for people. Daven for people who haven't found their shidduch. Daven for people who are waiting for their first child. Daven for people who are languishing for a refuah. And if you need an added incentive, let me share with you that there is a bounty of reward specifically for people who are nosei b'yolim chaverei and commiserate and empathize and are there for other people, both in ruchnius and in gashmius. In the spiritual world, the spiritual realm, and the material realm. Now, we just learned recently how Moshe Rabbeinu impaneled the first Sanhedrin, 70 people that became the Sanhedrin. Who were these 70 people? Rashi tells us that these 70 people were the policemen in Egypt whose job was to get the Jews up to make the bricks. But when they didn't reach their quota and the Egyptian taskmasters wanted to beat the Jews, you know who took the punishment on their backs? The shiur Yisroel, these Jewish policemen. They were whipped and they were beaten rather than have their brethren who were out there in the fields toiling. They took the whipping. And they became the Sanhedrin. But let me ask you a question. Were they tzaddikim? Yes. Were they nice people? Yes. Were they empathetic people? Yes. But were they talmidei chachamim? How do you become a member of the Sanhedrin if you're not a Talmid Chacham? To be a member of the Sanhedrin, you have to know Kol HaTorah Kula, you have to know 70 languages, you have to know every mitzvah of Torah. Lahavdil, you can't become a Supreme Court justice just because you're a nice guy. So how did these people, the shaitan, the policemen, become overnight Talmidei Chachamim? Says Rav Moshe Shmuel Shapiro, because if you're a nosei b'olam chaveira and you put your back out for another Jew, you're gifted overnight with Torah. And overnight they become Rosh Sanhedrin. And if you want the material award of what it means and the gift and the bounty and the windfall that awaits people who are nosei b'oil, listen to a Baal HaTurim with one knech, with one Haisofa from Rav Matisyahu Solomon Shlita. As we mentioned, the Rebbeinu Shalom first appeared to Klal Yisroel in that sneh, in that lowly bush. Mitay chasneh, v'loy li lanacher, the lowly bush, to convey the message, imay anaychi b'tzara. Rebbeinu Shalom says, I'm with you. That's who I am. And I want you to emulate me. The Baal HaTurim says, there are only two places in all of Torah that the pasuk begins with the words Ule Yosef. Number one, says the Baal HaTurim, Ule Yosef yulad shnei banim beter tavai shnas harav. That Yosef HaTzadik had two children before the years of famine. But after that, he stopped engaging with his wife and he had no more children. Why? Because even though he was in the palace and he was the viceroy, I am not going to engage in pleasure while my people are suffering. Ule Yosef yulad shnei banim b'terem tovei shnas harav. Where's the other place in Tanakh, in Torah, where you have the word Ule Yosef begins a pasuk? Ule Yosef Omar. Mavarechas HaShem artzoi, mi meged shamay mitol, umitahoim ravetzes tochas. that at the end, Moshe Rabbeinu, Uli Yosef Amar, B'varechas Hashem Artzai, says Rashi, Shlo hoyso b'nachalas hashrotim eretz malei kol tuv ka'artza shel Yosef. That the most fertile, lush land in Eretz Yisroel was the portion that went to Yosef. You know why? Because Uli Yosef yulad tei shnei borim terem b'hovei shnas harav. Because Yosef was a mishtativ b'tzara shel chaveiroi. Because Yosef was a nosei b'olam chaveiroi. Because Yosef empathized, and the Rebbeinu Shalom remembers those things. And therefore, when it came time to give Yosef, he got the windfall, he got the bounty. Because he was a nosei b'oil. Zok Rav Matisyahu. You know what it says in that brach of Yosef at the end of the Torah that we read on Simchas Torah? Umimeged eretz umloyai uritzayin shaychen isneh. You know who's giving you this bracha? You know who's giving you this bounty? The ritzayin shaychen isneh. The Rebbeinu Shalom who dwells in the bush. Says Rashi, "K'moed sheichein sneh v'tei artzim mivarechas mirtzaynai." From the Rebbeinu Shalom, "Hanikle oloi tchila basneh." The Rebbeinu Shalom that appeared to us first in the sneh to teach us one thing, that to be a Jew is to empathize. To be a Jew is to be nosei b'olam chaveiroi. That's the hakdama to Torah. That's the shalom aleichem of the Rebbeinu Shalom. That's who I am, and that's who I value, and that's who I appreciate. And when Yosef demonstrated that middah, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, "Uretzayin sheichen isneh." You were like my middah. You copied me. You emulated me. And therefore, you're going to get the greatest bounty of Eretz Yisrael. Here's the Shaloi Lishma. We're all human beings. We're not all tzaddikim. We don't always do things altruistically. But here's the payoff. You want to be zeicha to Torah? You want to become an Adam Gadol? Nosei b'oil. You want to be comfortable, you want material wealth, you want to be able to feed your family and to provide for others. Be a nosei b'oil. It comes with a bracha. The bounty and the goodness that the Rebbeinu Shalom has, he bestows on those people that emulate him and are nosei b'oil and chaveiroi.